right, ladies and gentlemen, hello and welcome back once again to the only coast to coast radio show all about the information economy. It's time for Inside Analysis. Yours truly, Eric Kavanaugh here, and a great lineup of guests for you today. We'll be talking to Al Bissmeyer. He's from a company called Viamedici. They do master data management and data governance and basically help reconcile information systems, which is pretty important stuff these days. And Baz Khuti is here with us as well from Sustain360, and they're doing some excellent work in guess what it is, sustainability and tracking suppliers and being responsible about these things. And so we're going to talk today about practical sustainability. Like, how can we do good things to help Mother Earth? I think most people want to help Mother Earth. I remember the old commercial of the Indian on the side of the road. This is like the mid 1970s, and they showed a Native American at the side of the road. He looked down, there's garbage all over the side of the road, and the poor guy is crying. And let me tell you, everyone felt bad. Okay, everyone who saw that commercial felt bad. We're like, oh man, we got to do better than that. Just garbage, litter, it's just bad news, you know? So we've come a long way, I think, in a whole bunch of different ways, quite frankly. We don't litter as much these days. We try to recycle. I remember the old mantra, reduce, reuse, recycle. Good stuff. Of course, emissions are big on the radar these days, and we are concerned about what's going on with CO2. And I do want to throw out one of my theories and get the expert opinion of these gentlemen as we talk about this stuff, because the focus here again is practical sustainability. So, what can we do practically that can help us be better stewards of Earth, is the bottom line. And the Clean Water Act, Clean Air Act, things of this nature have gone a long way, folks. I mean, I got to tell you, I'm 56 years old, and I remember when Lake Erie, the mistake on the lake, as they joked, it caught fire because there was so much oil and other terrible stuff. I mean, they used to just dump everything in these rivers and these lakes. It was just dreadful. And we've really improved on that front quite a bit. But there are other things that come into play. At the mouth of the Mississippi, for example, there's a dead zone, which is largely because of toxins coming from petrochemicals, including nitrogen and phosphorus and other things from the Mississippi going all the way down through the United States and then going out at the mouth of the Mississippi. There's a dead zone down there. What can we do about that? I mean, I've had various ideas over the years. I would love to see capital projects focus on water delivery, things of that nature. Every year the Mississippi overflows. We could set up aqueducts to deliver water across the country. There are lots of different things we can do, and especially if caps are melting up in Canada, we can find some way to leverage that and be strategic about managing these resources. And of course, our federal government spends a lot of money and did in the 2008 financial crisis, bailing out the big banks. Well, was that smart? I don't know. Some people say it wasn't. I would love to see these capital improvement projects. But I do want to throw out this theory I had about understanding the impact of CO2, because of course the general belief is that there's too much CO2 and that it's causing storms to get more severe, and this is very possible if you think about all the cars that are burning, all the factories running. A lot of CO2 is being produced. Well, what's interesting is we do have a test case. We do have a very clear line of demarcation when CO2 levels dropped, at least from human production, and that was the COVID lockdowns. Think about, we locked down all over the world, especially here in the States. I can tell you, really April was the peak, but April into May, even into June, there was a serious lowering of CO2 emissions because people just weren't driving around. And I noticed some things that were very interesting. We actually had to go for a medical treatment for my wife across the state. So we drove in, like, it was like March. So it was in the heat of all this stuff. It was really intense. We were in New York City when it was all going down. No one was leaving. They were banging the pots at sunset to thank all the medical workers. It was intense stuff. And what I noticed for several months after that is a lot of the animals came out. There are many more birds of prey flying around. There are all sorts of animals coming out. And it's like, they're like, all right, those humans finally stayed inside. Let's go back and do our thing. They just came out everywhere. So I thought that was pretty cool. But then I thought to myself, we should see some change in the atmosphere with that dramatic a drop. The drop is estimated like 8, 9%. I read today 17% during April of 2020. Well, think about it. The Earth is on an annual cycle for weather. So if you look 1 year later, what do you see around the world? And guess what? There were some changes. Texas froze for days. Houston freaked out. They lost power, they lost water, all kind of terrible stuff happened because they just weren't used to that kind of thing. And we've seen some strange weather patterns too, which stands to reason. So things changed, but did they change strategically in the way we want them to change? And I think that's an open question going forward as we talk about CO2 levels and what we can do about it. And I did some research as well, and CO2 levels used to be much higher a long, long time ago, quarter of a billion years ago. CO2 levels were estimated to be about 0.5%. They're 0.04% now, so at historic lows in terms of the evolution of Earth. What does that mean? I don't know exactly. It was hotter back then. I'm guessing there were dinosaurs and lots of lizards and huge plants and all kind of stuff going on. So things have changed remarkably. But I get back to practical sustainability. So the gentleman today can really help us understand how to do practical things in supply chain, but also in our daily habits and in our data and using our data. So with that, let me bring in our two guests. First, Baz Khuti from Sustain360. Welcome to Inside Analysis. Tell us a bit about yourself and what you're working on and what you think about my crazy theory.
No, Erica, thank you very much for the opportunity here to present Sustain360. I've been in tech about 38 years, kind of split into two halves. One was working for corporates in industrial space. So it was GE, Emerson, Schneider, and so on, and built a lot of products which were operational focused. So reducing energy costs and energy efficiency, especially in data centers and telcos and things like that. And then in 2015, I became an entrepreneur with my first startup, which is in data centers. And we focused the use of AI and advanced techniques and using data within data centers to reduce the environmental impact or the energy costs within data centers. And I saw, up to 8 to 25, sometimes 42% improvements in energy efficiency within data centers. That was a great journey. And then what happened is sort of another opportunity where if we can look at products and projects like construction projects, but more at design. And so how do we use data during design phases to understand the environmental impact of materials, products, suppliers, supply chains, and so on. And so I formed Sustain360 just over a couple of years ago, and then we incubated and brought the product to market September last year. And the product effectively allows customers, manufacturers, and construction companies where we bring in their design documents and design data, and then we profile that data from an environmental impact perspective and then recommend alternatives to reduce that. So that's what the purpose is. And there we're seeing on average 38%. And in one case with project we did was about a 64% improvement in environmental impacts. So design can have, in my view, design and operational efficiency put together can have a really material impact on the carbon footprint.
Yeah, and you are basically building out, or you have built out a matrix or a repository of information about suppliers all over the world, right? And of course, you mentioned before the show that industries have their own documentation on suppliers, and of course, clients have their own. And you've been able to reconcile a lot of this disparate data to get a strategic view of all those suppliers worldwide. Is that right? Can you tell us about that for a minute?
Yeah, and it's not just suppliers, it's also looking at material that, since the 90s, the world has been putting, environmental engineers and scientists around the world have built out databases which can take a resin, for example, and for that resin, you can immediately know the environmental impact for it. And so we can model what's called a life cycle assessment for that resin. And so the databases out there have this information. What's not been done is actually automating that external data with internal data and matching the two together. And that's what we've done. And hence the relationship with our organization, because it's all about master data management and standardization.
Yeah, that's a good segue to bring Al in. So Al Bissmeyer from Viamedici, you have an MDM solution, master data management, and so that allows organizations to reconcile all of these disparate information systems to get that strategic view. And it sounds like this partnership between your company and Sustain360 is really quite complementary. Can you tell us about that?
It's very complimentary. Thanks, Eric. Basically, I'm like Baz. I've been in the industry for quite a long time, not quite as long as him. I've only been in for about 30 years. But I met Baz years and years ago when I was at Microsoft and he was at Emerson and he was doing the environmental, as he mentioned, the data center stuff. And our company specializes in master data management and product information management. It's based out of Germany. And Germany is way ahead, and Europe in general are way ahead of the US in many respects as it looks at environmental impacts and impacts on things that are going on with the environment. And so with the exception of California. I'll put that as a caveat. But if you look at, where Europe is and where Germany is specifically, a number of our customers have come and said, hey, we really have a number of issues as it pertains to our product information and the impact that we're having within the environment. And so I reached out to Baz and said, I think there's an opportunity for us to collaborate and work with our customers on this because your knowledge and what you bring to the table in concert with the data that we're working with within these organizations, we can actually provide benefit, and it's real world benefit on where they can do an analysis and have an impact within their organizations and minimize their liability and also address what's going on environmentally. And so we see this as a huge opportunity for both of our organizations, but also more importantly for the companies that we work with and the environment in general. It's going to have a big impact, I would say.
Well, and I mean, just from a logistics perspective, and I guess I'll throw this out there that I love seeing this effort to provide value on multiple levels. Because I think in the abstract, if you just tell people to reduce their CO2 emissions, it's kind of hard to wrap your head around that and like what am I going to do and how's that going to really help? But when you start layering in business value, cost savings, reducing expenses, things of this nature, now business people go, oh, okay, well, that's a conversation I will gladly have. And so if I can help the environment by lowering my costs, that's good. But also understanding where the products and services are coming from, right? So being able to do the math, understanding if I buy products from this country over here, what is the impact of bringing it all the way over to Detroit to build something versus some product maybe in South America or somewhere else that's closer. Those are fairly complex things to sort out. But once you have a mechanism in place to do that, it's very valuable, right, Al?
It is actually, and there's also another side to the equation. I think actually what you just said is spot on. I also think though that in what we're seeing, and we've done a few webinars and discussions with our customers about this. If you look at the consumer, consumers want to buy environmentally friendly products. And a
Hmm.
lot of the challenges that they don't know who the environmental product producers are, other than people that self-proclaim that they're environmentally good.
Right.
And so if you have a third-party validation or you're able to actually assess the things that are within the product, then it doesn't become as much of an abstract. So as you mentioned, CO2 is one thing, but you start looking at chemicals as another thing, or you start looking at air quality as another thing, or you start looking at other components in terms of reusability and life cycle, that becomes much more tangible for a consumer. So you have two aspects. You have one is the internal, being compliant either to your people that are part of your supply chain in terms of your customers, business to business type of scenario. And then you also have working with the consumer and having or being able to provide a product which has a lower environmental impact, which is validated, and then the consumer feels good about what they're saying. And we've seen some people that say, consumers are willing to pay 70% of consumers are willing to pay, a premium for products that are environmentally compliant because intrinsically they want to have less of an impact on the environment, and they want the products that they're consuming to be, low impact products, which we're seeing a lot of people get behind in certain industries specifically. Kind of the fashion industry is a big pusher there. You're seeing
Hmm.
some things with the construction building supply industry starting to look at that too. And so there's different verticals that are industries that are kind of getting behind this as we see.
Yeah, and Baz, I'll throw this back over to you. To that end, having an information resource like you folks have collaboratively built, that's a big deal because what gets measured gets managed. and you can provide some detail around that. I think you even said you've got some foundational model or something that's woven into it that's making recommendations for folks. Can you talk about that real quick?
Absolutely. So once you've got kind of this fabric built out across different data sources, it's not big data, it's just disparate data.
Hmm.
And a lot of that data is also unstructured, so it's in PDFs. And what I mean by that is it's in safety sheets, it's in bill of ladings, it's in environmental product declaration sheets. So a lot of the data which is in the ERP systems, which are attachments to a transaction which has been done, but the data is there. So how do we sort of pull that data together? Once you've done that and that data layer is in place, you've now got, and you bring the external data in as well. So you're now matching external data where standards have been put in place around environmental metrics, by whether it's generic or cross industry verticals. You're bringing in external data and you're fusing these two things together. That then allows you to, what we built is what's called a micro foundational model.
Hmm.
So it's a large language model with about 67 billion tokens in it. So it's not, too small. And it's the world's first, collaboratively, world's first a foundational model, which allows you to focus on sustainability. And now you've got that, you've got prompt engineering where you can start typing in, I've got material X, Y, and Z in my products or in my suppliers. Find me the best alternatives. I think all it
Wow.
recommends on this on behalf, or I've got material X, Y, and Z. Tell me whether this material has forever chemicals in it, has got pathogens in it.
Hmm.
Okay. And so
That's
you're
awesome.
using these advanced techniques in AI and these data engineering techniques to actually solve real world problems very, very quickly, and what I call AI for good.
Yeah.
And so that's, hopefully that gives you a kind of practical example of use. Yeah.
Yeah, that is absolutely fantastic, and we can kind of dig more in the next segment about what that means. But using one of these foundational models as the method of communication between the human and the data, which, as you suggest, is wildly disparate, that's a really seriously big deal. And you really kind of couldn't have done it before this layer. I mean, we've had Elasticsearch and other things, but nothing like what you see with these foundational models. So, folks, don't touch that. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back here on Inside Analysis, talking with a couple experts in sustainability and also data. Data fuels decision making. That's what you want. And the solutions we have these days, folks, are really quite impressive. And the one I just heard about in the press segment is one of the more impressive ones I've come across and does actually help me prove out a prediction I've made that these foundational models really are going to change everything. They are not be all end all solutions. You use them in a particular workflow. They do need to be fine-tuned and monitored and curated for sure. We've talked in the past about foundational models, how when they get to the fringe of certain subjects, that's when they start manufacturing ideas and making stuff up, errors. Some people call them hallucinations. It's not really hallucination. It's just it made something up. It generated text based upon a prompt and it's training. And if it doesn't have training in a particular domain, that's where it starts to get a little bit loosey-goosey. But if you do have a tight focus on something, that's very good. And I should point out that these models tend to be consensus engines more than anything else. So when you've trained a whole bunch of data, we train a model on a whole bunch of data, whatever you've trained it on, if there's enough, it's going to find the average and it's going to give you a decent explanatory answer. It's when you haven't fully trained it on a particular domain of information, that's when you kind of run into some trouble. But these focused models, I think, are going to be very powerful because they are focused on a particular domain of expertise or of information. And Al, we were just talking in the last segment with Baz about this foundational model for sourcing, for product information. And you and I have been around for a while in this industry. Old-fashioned search, not so good on topics like that. I mean, Google obviously has done a great job on Google search, but even their Google search appliances. I talked to someone at a conference in April who gave me the inside scoop. She was like, yeah, we never really quite got it to where we had hoped to get it. And it just didn't quite work out. And I think that's actually where chatbots came from because search on websites was just a disaster. It just wasn't working very well. And so you had the chatbots, the early ones, they're also not so great. But now with these foundational models, and there's something of a configuration engine you're going to talk about too, we're really getting somewhere. And that is a very big door that we're opening to new possibilities. But Al, tell us about this configuration thing on the foundational model that Baz mentioned.
Yeah, so we're working with Baz, and this is a huge thing. So Viamedici actually has a configurator, and what it allows companies to do is modify the actual product sets that they're creating based on the attribute sets that they want to pull together for a product. So you take a bill of material, you remesh it essentially, and you can minimize the scope of what you're creating in a lot size of one. Well, what
Hmm.
this means is if you take it in concert with the foundational model that Baz is talking about is conceptually you could actually take a product and you could configure it, and then you could run and see which product, based on its configuration, has the lowest environmental impact. And you can actually look at the cost that's associated with it, and you could also look at if there are substitute, materials for it, essentially, in concert with the configuration. So now you're going from what could have essentially an equivalent product, maybe with some fewer things potentially, that immediately meet the business requirement that you have. And you can look at the difference in terms of its impact, and you can also look at the difference that it has in terms of the cost for your organization and all these types of things. And that is very much revolutionary because now you're not sitting down and building this out for every single thing. You can do it very dynamically for a lot of new products that you're creating. And it's I think a significant leap in terms of not only what you do from the creation of a product, but its impact on the environment and how it's being utilized within the product ecosystem that's out there. And that
Yeah.
applies to a lot of different products.
Yeah, that's really cool. And also, I'll just point out that when you grease the tracks to exploration and discovery, people will do more of it. I think there was an opportunity cost. People didn't really look into it because it was really hard to look into before. I mean, if you don't have a directory that you can search and you just have to do things manually, I mean, that's a tremendous amount of work. And is it really going to be worth your effort? Unless people get some reward pretty quickly from the effort they put into a task, they're not going to want to put that much effort into the task. So the fact that you've opened this door and made it possible, I have to think that the people who are using this are like, wow, this is pretty cool. Is that about right, Al?
Oh, it's super cool. And just take the configuration piece out. Let's just talk about the foundational piece. The speed is amazing. I mean, Baz and I have looked at because we get together and we look at how many records we're, actually, running through from an LMM perspective. And you just can't believe how quickly you're getting a return. I mean, it is unbelievable. It's,
So if you look at the speed and also the aspect that the concern with large language models is that the data goes outside of your organization, the security aspect and the privacy aspects of it. And what we've done collaboratively is that we've built these models, as we call them, micro foundation, because they're focused on a domain. They're focused on sustainability. And so if we build a sustainability assistant for you, then that needs to run on your data within your organization, within your cloud, within your VPC, or within your data center. And then the privacy is protected and data protection is in place. And you're only sending out the information you need if you need to go to a large language model and you control what data goes out.
Hmm.
Actual foundational model we've created, the micro model we've created, is actually running within your infrastructure. It's not running outside of your infrastructure. And it's learned your data and it's vectorized that data so that we can make that such super, super contextual to the problem you're trying to.
Yeah, he came back there. I saw it freeze for a second, but that he came back. So I mean, there's a RAG model approach that companies are using, retrieval augmented generation. Is that in play here? In other
Yes.
words, when you say the model is running inside your environment, I'm guessing you've got a vector database and you're actually feeding the embeddings of your corporate data into this vector database, and that it's part of the RAG model, correct?
Absolutely. So what we're doing, and it's both data sets from an internal perspective is taking the structured data from your ERPs, but that unstructured data as well in terms of PDFs, and then putting that, and one of the key difference here is that we use a knowledge graph database to build those relationships in. So what you're doing is the strength of two nodes is the carbon pathways between consumers and producers of carbon or environmental impacts are built in your knowledge graph. And then that is then presented to a search engine, which effectively goes against this sustainable foundational model to answer your query around what's the lowest carbon to cost ratio for something. Yeah.
That's very interesting. So is it a hybrid graph vector database, or you have a graph structure and then a vector database as well?
Oh, so it's a graph database, and then it's been vectorized, and that's how it's been done. Okay.
Wow, that's pretty fascinating. Did you guys build your own, or are you OEMing something, or?
We OEM, yeah, we OEM with a leading provider of graph databases out there.
Very cool. Yeah. I'm a big fan of knowledge graphs because they do help understand relationships between things. It's not like a relational database, which has its own purposes, obviously, but graph databases, and I'll throw it over to you. Graph databases are very good at understanding relationships, right? Nodes and edges, and the nodes are entities. The edges are adjectives, basically facets or characteristics of the nodes. And as such, they're very good at being able to understand what goes with what and how all that can be put together. Is that about right, Al?
Yeah, well, and that's what we utilize as well. I mean, it is key. I mean, if you want to look at relationship of supplier to product to consumer to, any, item or element that's being utilized, graph is wonderful for that. You can drill down and you can get into the whole 360 view of all the interdependencies and various solutions that are there, which I think is where, the industry is going to go and overall over time, but it's very powerful.
Yeah. Well, I mean, this is very exciting stuff. So, Baz, can you give us any thoughts on how many people are using this, or where are you in terms of your overall objective? Like, what are you doing to get the word out to get more people involved in this?
Oh, that's good. That's good. So as our focus is manufacturing and construction sectors, and some examples where we work with one of the leading composite companies in the world, so composite fiberglass companies in the world, which is an alternative to cement. And people don't know that. And so they use our software for all their large projects worldwide to show their customers that how sustainable composites are to steel, cement, aluminium.
That's very
Okay.
cool.
And so it's a replacement strategy where people haven't considered that a composite can have the same strength and longevity, but have a material sustainability reduction compared to what I called carbon bombs, which are the steel, the glass, the aluminium, and the cement out there. And so this is the world's largest fiberglass manufacturing company, and they use our product, well, in every major project to show clients that you're going down, they're building right now. We just did a project around the largest glass roof in the world being built right now. And it's going to use a huge amount of glass. And it's still going to use some amount of glass and steel, but they did an alternative design, which they did, structural engineers did. They used our software to show the cradle to grave, as I call it, which is what's called circularity. And so cradle to grave view against those alternatives, and showed I think it was 36% reduction in environmental impact. And a lot of that impact was recyclability, because composites can be recycled, crushed, and reused. Whilst with cement, it's very, very hard. All you can do is crush it and effectively reuse it again, but effectively you can't effectively use it in any other way going forward. And it's also very toxic once you've actually crushed it and water hits it. So these factors are taken into account as we use clients use our software. That's one tangible example of people using our software.
Yeah, and you mentioned that glass and steel and aluminum, like these, typically to manufacture those, to create them, you're saying just generates a tremendous amount of CO2. Is that right? As opposed
Correct.
to this composite, which has a much lower footprint. Is that right?
Exactly. So if you look at those four industries, and they are the highest outside of petroleum, they're some of the highest carbon emitting products out there in the world. What do? They take raw material and they put it through a furnace, okay? And that furnace is heated at a very, very high temperature and uses typically fossil fuels to fuel the furnace. Okay, and so as a result of that, there's a huge amount of carbon used in the manufacturing of those particular materials, whilst a composite doesn't. Uses some degree of energy, but not to the magnitude of an aluminium plant, for example.
That's very interesting. What are some of the materials that go into this composite? That can you speak to that at all? Like,
Oh yeah, it's kind of, yeah. So some of them. So if you look at the raw material would be a fiberglass. The second material would be a resin, which binds everything together.
Hmm.
In this case, the client, when we started working with them, we showed a clear change in two things. Firstly, traditional manufacturing was resins with the fiberglass, and we showed them that if they used a bio-based resin, that the reduction was significant. It was like a 2x reduction in the environmental impact. Second thing was that current resin, petrol-based resin, was being sourced from Asia. And so we modeled the supply chain for that resin. And as a result of that, the reduction by moving to a European manufacturer of a bio-based resin resulted in a significant reduction in carbon footprint. Those are kind of the materials go in, but this is the alternative. Even in a more sustainable product like a composite, you've still got opportunities to reduce from petrol-based resin to bio-based resins and improve your supply chain.
Yeah, that's cool stuff. And like I say, when people are aware of the opportunities, they will look into it if it's easy to do. And that's one of the keys, right? Is that you have facilitated the discovery, the exploration, the understanding, and the modeling. I mean, what you're talking about is price modeling. You're talking about manufacture processes and understanding how long this takes, how long that takes, what's the overall cost, what are the benefits in terms of durability, for example, and reusability. And you talk about toxicity, how some of these old ways of doing things do create toxic materials. And so I think this is very interesting that you're kind of opening the kimono, if you will, to show people that there are other ways of doing things. And guess what? They can save you money, they can save you time, but also you can create more durable products. And at the same time, you're helping out the environment. You know, when you can check all those boxes, that's when people start to really pay attention and to listen. And you've put some meat in the bones, basically. You've helped justify what is being suggested here, so it's not just a sacrifice that someone's making. I think that's one of the challenges, right, with environmentalism in general, is not many people want to sacrifice stuff. But folks, don't touch that. I'll be right back. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, back on Inside Analysis, talking to Baz Khuti from Sustain360 and Al Bissmeyer from Viamedici. And we're talking all about practical sustainability. And I'm learning a lot in this show. It's very exciting, because materials management is such a huge space and it's such a big and important space, and certainly in construction, but in product design and manufacturing, kind of knowing the material science behind things and knowing what's possible. And, you know, I'll throw out this historical point. I remember when I was in like middle school reading in Encyclopedia Britannica in our house, I was looking up polymers, and it was a potential path in my career that I decided not to go down. But I was very fascinated by it, and the chemical side of things and the engineering side and what you can do with polymers. It's very fascinating stuff, and we're kind of learning about that today. And Al, I'd like to throw it back over to you. You know, as I mentioned, when it's easy to do the right thing and you know you're doing the right thing, that's going to grease the tracks, as opposed to someone just trying to guilt you into changing your behavior. I mean, there's a certain psychology around this stuff, right? So it seems to me you guys are on the right track for giving the information necessary and building the information systems to enable this stuff, right?
Yeah, it is. Well, and I think there's several different things though that are kind of going on. It's almost like a vortex thing going on here. I think if you look at ESG has been around for a while. Some of the compliance issues have been around for a while in terms of groups that have been requesting this. And then you have the consumer intent that's interested in being environmental compliant. But if you look at like the last 6 months, I would say the sustainability issue is really heated up and it's really gotten a lot of focus. And so the European Commission has come out with a digital product passport, which really says, hey, you need to actually be compliant by 2027. And the battery technology groups or they have a battery product battery declaration, a digital product passport for batteries, BPP. I'm acronym city. I gotta get these terms in my head.
Sorry.
But basically, so they got BPP coming up. And basically, so batteries and fashion are kind of leading the charge there, and it's for compliance as it pertains to carbon, and then looking at full life cycle management of those product sets. But then if you actually take back and look at California obviously had Prop 95, which goes back years, but it looks at 1,000 chemicals that are required, and more companies are leaning in for compliance with that. You have in the building and construction industry, you're looking at electronic product declarations, which actually looks at all the materials that are required, and that's into 2025 compliance and getting going in there. And then even with ESG's come out and they said, hey, 50,000 companies have to be compliant for Securities and Exchange, but moving into the next few years, there's more of a push there. So you have the stick of all these compliance and governing bodies that are saying, hey, you're going to have to do this. It's coming down the pike. It's going to be within the next 4 or 5 years. You have Gartner, which has said sustainability is number 2 in terms of their priorities, and they've been pushing that at some of their recent conferences. And the Wall Street Journal is coming out with, forever chemical compliance or DPP compliance, and in the last few months with front page articles on these types of things. And so there's a heightened awareness that's going on. And what I see, even within our customers, and you asked Baz about customers, but we're looking at a lot in Europe, it's predominantly building supply. And then in the States here, we have a chemical company that's working with us. And so it's compliance on different components of sustainability. And the full life cycle is one of the things that's being looked at in terms of how do I do reusability? How do I look at what are the chemicals that are associated with it? How do I look at the carbon that's affiliated with it? So lots of different things that are going on. Some of them are compliance based. Some of them are, hey, this is the right thing to do. And the third thing that I'll mention, which I mentioned earlier, is a lot of these companies are seeing that consumers, they want to do it. They want, if I'm going to buy a washing machine, I want to have one that's going to work for a longer period of time. If I'm going to buy electronic device, I want to make sure that it doesn't have as much of an impact in terms of, if I throw the battery away, or which one has a lower impact,
Right.
or compliance, these types of things. And so there's a push to make sure that bill of material or the product that's being put out there is environmentally compliant. And it's almost like there's been a wake-up call recently, because the inquiries we're getting for this is growing significantly. Baz,
That's
Yeah, just to
Yeah,
say,
go ahead.
what I was saying on compliance is, if you look at the definition of emissions, it was after the Paris Agreement in 2015, and they came out with what we call Scope 1, 2, and 3. And Scope 1 is your direct emissions out of your plant, in terms of product using energy and so on. And Scope 2 is effectively the purchase of that energy to the plant from wherever the utility is. And Scope 3 is effectively the supply chain and the use of your products. Now, here's kind of the big message here, and why we, at my age, to create Sustain360 is since 2015, every CSR report out there, a corporate sustainability report out there, which is ESG focused around a standard called GRI, has focused on Scope 1 and 2, and they represent 30% of all emissions. So since 2015, what are we focused on? 30% of the emissions. 70% of emissions are in your supply chain and the use of your products. And why have we avoided that? We've avoided that because it's a data problem. Right?
Yeah.
So,
I'll mention one more thing, Eric, because it just kind of popped in my head. But in addition to all these standards and regulatory things, another thing I've seen in the last 2 years is the number of senior VPs of sustainability that these companies have put in. So like a lot of my big, multinational companies, they all have a vice president or a senior vice president of sustainability that's looking at everything that their organization is doing from a sustainability perspective. And that comes back to, obviously, with data, we're in data on everything with master data. So they're looking at, well, where am I, how am I sustainable as an organization? How are my products sustainable? They're kind of looking at a lot of different aspects in terms of sustainability within their organizations and compliance and differentiation in the marketplace relative to their product sets.
Yeah, that's good stuff. And we got about 3 minutes left in this segment as I'm thinking about these foundational models, which you can now use to understand your products and what composes them and what alternatives you have. You know what else these models are going to be really good for? Understanding regulations. So you train the model on the regulation, and then guess what? Your users can just ask questions. And this, to me, is one of the best use cases for these new tools, even though you have to check it. Yes, you have to check it, but guess what? Even if you asked a high-powered lawyer, you'd still have to check it. They're not always right either. So we shouldn't hold ourselves to a 100% accuracy level, but somewhere in the 90s, I think. But that's incredibly useful, Baz. I'll throw it over to you for the end user to say, okay, how does this regulation affect me with these different products? What do I need to do? Enter, and it comes and gives you a bunch of information. That is so much easier than trying to read this complex legalese and regulations, and people are scratching their heads. What the heck does this mean? That's a big deal, right, Baz?
That's a huge deal. And the foundational model focused on sustainability actually has read the top sustainable standards out there. So the
Yeah,
United Nations SDGs, the GRI standards out there,
right.
Task Force for Climate Disclosures, it's read down CP. So it's also already read all that and then brought that so it's in context to the material you're looking at in the industry you're in. So you're not having to spend time and energy learning, reading a whole lot of PDFs out there. And then he
Right.
applies it to the report. So when you're producing a report, it says, okay, which standard now applies to that report? So it aids compliance. And so the auditor and the auditing can be improved. So that's kind of actually spot on that one of the key components within this foundational model is the learning of those standards. And the problem with these standards is that there's interdependencies with them
Right.
and they're continuously changing.
Right.
And so to keep up to speed on them and also understand all the dependencies between the United Nations SDGs and the GRI reporting standards, there's a matrix you have to follow.
Hmm.
And how do you sort of manually do that is labor intensive in a spreadsheet. Well, now you've got a matrix already built for you, and as it updates, it's going to provide that information to you.
Yeah, and I think there's also a lot of work being done right now around reasoning. So if you look at the foundational models, large language models, they're really just text generators that are predictive engines, predicting which text they think you are going to want based upon their training and your prompts. And that's all fine and good. I see people throwing complex math problems at them and word problems and then going, aha, look, I couldn't figure it out. I'm like, well, you're kind of misusing the tool in that sense. So you do have to understand when to use these things and when not to use them. But I will say there is work being done on that reasoning side of the equation, and they can just layer that stuff in. Well, podcast bonus segment is coming up next, folks. Stand by. You're listening to Inside Analysis. All right, folks, time for the podcast bonus segment here on a fantastic show about practical sustainability. What are things you could do that'll help your business, that'll help your clients, that'll help the environment? We want to kill multiple birds with every stone. Maybe that's not the best metaphor since we're talking about helping the environment, but birds are people too, to a certain extent. I love birds, by the way. We have like 6, 7, 8 different kind of birds that chirp around our house every day. I've got the app Merlin. You can like listen and see which birds are chirping. These are wonderful times for people who love information. But Baz, I'd like to focus the last few minutes here on the collaboration between Sustain360 and Viamedici, which I guess is around these digital passports. Can you talk about that?
Absolutely, yeah. So one of the things which we need is data, and we need good quality data. And what Viamedici provides us is that it connects to ERP systems, which has all this data. So whether it's SAP or Oracle, whatever, decades and decades of data sets are in them. And so if we can get master data connections and also product information management from Viamedici, we don't have to go directly to those ERPs. So it's
Right.
kind of a bridge to get
Oh,
to them. And so that's what our solution provides us. But once we've got that, what we then do is think about it as it's an engine sitting right next to your ERP through a broker from Viamedici, which effectively allows us to generate environmental views of environmental lens to those products.
hmm.
And so we send that back. Once we've sent it back to EPIM as our product line, we then provide a digital fingerprint. So we basically provide the ability to put a blockchain in there. And so you know exactly the date, the time, and the data we use to calculate the sustainable metrics.
Oh, wow. Yeah, that's, I mean, Al, I'll throw it over to you. One of the funnier quotes I've heard on the show over the years, someone said, yeah, in IT, we always think one more layer of abstraction will solve all our problems. And a lot of times it does, right? And so you've got this layer of abstraction where it's kind of like with Databricks and their Delta Lake, right? Where you're tracking changes within this layer, and that way you can roll back to a point in time and understand what was happening. Pretty cool stuff. I mean, before when you couldn't do that, not so good. Now you can do that stuff. It sounds similar to what Baz is talking about. Can you go into some detail on how that works?
No, it's actually really good, and it's actually where things are going. So if you look at, and I mentioned the digital product passport kind of standard that's been put out there by the European Commission, they're looking at the full life cycle of products essentially. So you have everything that went into that product, its bill of material when it was actually produced and made available. And one of the things that they've been talking about is using RFID to actually do this, which actually is just a step that's not necessary. So what you can actually do is you can take a QR code and a token and actually have the full bill of material maintained as to what goes into the making of that product upon its release, and then you can click that up off the QR code, and you have full information about that product, and then replacement and reusability all built into the solution. So we're really seeing the collaboration and the fulfillment to digital product passport is something that is very beneficial, and our building supply customers are very much behind this. They're actually giddy about what we're doing in this space because of its usability as much as anything. It's like you have
Hmm.
a full audit trail, and what some of our customers are looking at in different industries, more CPG and fashion and this type of thing, is the ability to actually have this validation for um, their consumer. Because one of the things we didn't get into is Viamedici also does, we did not only do MDM, but we do product information management. So we're actually taking information and we're making that information available down into either a retail environment or e-commerce application or a marketplace or whatever, so a consumer can look at product data and what's going on. And sometimes that's B2B and sometimes it's B2C. But if you have all that information, it's maintained, you scan your QR code, you can see, okay, this is what's within the product set. And then you have a full detail and a validation by a third party that this is what made up this product essentially.
Yeah,
And the B2B
that's
space, I love
Just to
it.
say on the, so when you as a consumeristic experience, so what I was saying is you're on an e-commerce site fueled by their EPIM product, which has now got embedded sustainable information. That QR code has a blockchain associated with it.
hmm.
So it's a secure QR code, as I call them, yeah. And so as soon as you scan, the chain of custody, the chain of evidence on that sustainability information is guaranteed. So you, the customer, you got trust with the consumer that this has got the right level of integrity and evidence behind it.
Yeah, and I'm just guessing here that the ideal endpoint is the QR code on the product where the consumer can just scan it with their phone and see all this information. Is that already there, or that's the vision of where it's going?
No, we built
No,
that.
that's
That's what
fair.
Yeah,
it's built. Yeah.
that's cool.
Mm.
That's just amazing because now, again, a consumer can get access to information, very detailed information. I mean, I'm old enough to remember when they started putting all the details on the cereal boxes. It's got riboflavin and vitamin D and vitamin B12 and like all this stuff that was just an estimate. I mean, obviously, but you can go so much deeper now and it can be dynamic, meaning something changes on the back end, something will change when I scan this code and take a look at it. And like I say, when you know better, you do better. So people want to do good things. People want to do things that are good for the environment. And you folks are enabling them to do that, which I think is just absolutely fantastic. Well, folks, look these gentlemen up online. We've been talking to Baz Khuti, that's Bazkhuti from Sustain360, and Al Bissmeyer. Al, just like you'd expect, American League, Bissmeyer. Look them up on LinkedIn, another great resource with information about people and companies and good things happening in the world. And wow, what a great show today. Thanks to both of you gentlemen for all your hard work and for improving the beautiful environment around us. This does conclude our show. Send me an email if you want to be on this radio show sometime. Info@InsideAnalysis.com. We'll talk to you next time, folks. Take care. You've been listening to Inside Analysis.